they live. Let's enter the buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as
Dr. David Jacobs was a professor of history at Temple University, so he comes with a very unique perspective as a scholar to the UFO subject, which he's been studying basically all of his life. He's written 5 books on the subject, including The UFO Controversy in America, and most recently, Walking Among Us. And that's what we'll be focusing on as we talk about the question of alien-human hybrids and what the alien agenda might be on this planet. So, Dr. Jacobs, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
This is a very heavy subject, obviously, but coming from a serious scholar such as yourself, it helps, obviously, will give us some perspective and shed some light. Let's start with this question, I suppose, based on the most recent book, Walking Among Us, as to do you believe that aliens are here amongst us, basically working to integrate their alien species into the human species?
Well, I can't say yes or no exactly to the way you phrase that. I think that the best thing I can say is that the hybrid phenomenon, which is a matter of reproduction, that is to say, DNA from humans is mixed, I surmise, with DNA from certain aliens to produce hybrids. This reproductive aspect has been known since the very, very beginning of the abduction phenomenon that made publicity. That is to say, the Antonio Villas-Boas case in 1957 in Brazil and the Barney and Betty Hill case in 1961 in New Hampshire. Those are the first 2 cases that we ever heard of, and both of them had a reproductive aspect to them, which of course nobody on Earth had any knowledge of or could figure out or anything like that. However,
that's where that mockery came, basically, the joke about aliens doing anal probes, right, comes from this reproductive or sexual orientation to...
Right, well, that came out of Whitley Strieber's book, A Communion. But and it's sort of a laugh line now, but it happens once in a while. It's not something that people dwell on, or that is an important aspect of the phenomenon. But in the 1980s or early 90s, I can't exactly remember when, I'll have to go back and look it up, my colleague Bud Hopkins, who was one of the most important abduction researchers ever, called me up and told me that he had this astounding story, this amazing story that somebody had told him, and this woman was taken on board a UFO, and she was subjected to various procedures, and then they took her into another room, and they presented her with a very strange-looking baby. And I thought to myself, what? What do you mean, baby? Because the word baby and UFO had never been said in the same sentence before, as far as I know. He said, yes, not only that, but they wanted her to hold the baby and then to feed the baby. And of course, this was inconceivable to me, because she was not lactating, she was not pregnant or anything like that, and yet they were forcing her to do this, or they put the baby to her breast. And I thought to myself, we will never be able to understand how these beings think, because they value form over function. They put the baby to her breast, which is the form of feeding, but because she's not lactating, there is no function. How can we ever understand this from these beings? Eventually, we learned, of course, that the woman is already lactating. They have stimulated lactation, and there's reasons for holding the baby and all sorts of things like this. That was still fairly early on. Since that time when Bud Hopkins first discovered these hybrids, these babies, people have described them as babies, as young children, toddlers, children, adolescents, young adults, old, but not older adults for some reason or another. So the question then is, how long have they been doing this? Has this been something that they started when Bud Hopkins did a session with this woman, that was the beginning of it? Almost certainly not. They started probably when they first began abducting people. And that is probably, and I'm guessing here, but I'm making an educated guess from some evidence, in the last quarter of the 19th century. Stronger evidence comes in the 1920s, when Hopkins did a session with a person who was a young boy in the 1920s. I did sessions with people who were abductees in the 1930s and 40s and so forth. Now, when I say sessions, I mean sessions of hypnosis. And when I say hypnosis, I mean basically relaxation techniques. Nobody's in a trance and they don't think that they're a teacup or something like that. And the reason that we have to do that is because this is it's a secretive phenomenon. It's clandestine. Without that secretive aspect to it, there would be no abduction phenomenon. And so people, and the way in which you conduct a secretive program is you keep it secret from the person themselves, from the people themselves. So they can't tell others. And so we think that maybe 95% of abductees don't know that they're abductees. They know they have had odd occurrences, but they don't know, they can't attach it to the abduction phenomenon. In other words, the program of secrecy is extremely successful.
But there might be some indication maybe of missing time or some kind of blackout feeling thereafter, right? And something odd happened, maybe some kind of marking on the body. Right? These would be indications of an abduction. Exactly that.
For example, waking up with a broken arm. That's not a normal situation. You're laying in bed and you don't break your arm and wake up at that point. You wake up in the morning with a broken arm. And it's impossible to imagine how that could have happened. Or if these are things that happen at night. Now, most abductions that I've looked at don't happen when the person is asleep, but it's close. Or a fully formed scar on your body, fully formed scar that was not there the day before. I have seen this with mine own eyes, as they say. Or I did a session with a woman one day, and the next day I saw her again, and she had a perfectly formed, complete scar, not a scab, not a cut, right between her thumb and her forefinger on her left hand, and the exact same scar between her thumb and her forehand on her right hand. And I saw her hands the day before, and those scars were not there. And even though I am an abduction researcher, my jaw hit the floor because I knew I was looking at something that was impossible. I was looking at something that was simply not biologically possible. You do not form scar tissue in 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever it was. Right. Humans can't do that. So they have those kinds of things. They have those things. There's two other things you have to understand about the abduction phenomenon. Number one, a person is an abductee because their mother or their father was an abductee. And their mother or father, the grandparents, one of them or both of them might have been abductees. And probably their great-grandparents might have been abductees, but at that point, we're doing some guesswork. Right. This is a global phenomenon. It does not matter where a person lives, a person's upbringing, a person's intelligence, a person's educational level, whether that person was kept in a closet for the first 9 years of his life. Nothing matters. They all say the same thing in the same precise detail around the world. There has never been a phenomenon like this in human history.
But now, are you talking about the exact same alien species that are abducting all these people?
Yes.
Now, what species is this of alien?
They talk about gray aliens. They talk about ones who look like praying mantises, insect-like ones. They talk about ones that look sort of reptilian, and then there's sort of a wider a disagreement, so to speak, about, well, there's different kinds of reptilians. Some of them, when you have them draw a reptilian, they draw a gray alien, in other words. And then hybrids. Now, this came a little bit later, but yes, hybrids in different degrees of hybridization.
But now the hybrids that were abducting, or the hybrids were actually in the physical world, the physical human 3D world?
On board the UFO. On board a UFO. Yes, everything is on board a UFO. The main thing that they talked about, though, that was really sort of astounding, was the procedures done to them on tables, table procedures. They all say the same things about table procedures. And it's almost impossible to imagine what they're doing when they're, quote, examining people. And it is not an examination as we would know it. I've been able to understand, I've only been able to understand with a relative degree of certainty one procedure that they do. They'll sometimes take an instrument and draw it across a person's foot, and their foot flexes. That's a reflex exam of some sort. They're testing reflex. That is the only thing that I have been able to understand, except one other thing. Barney Hill said that they took their thumb and forefinger, put him on his stomach on the table, and they ran the thumb and forefinger all the way down his vertebrae. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases have been talked about like that by men and by women, both. It's extremely common, and I could not imagine what it was. And then one day I was looking through a guide on how to do a neurological examination, and I looked at I'm a historian, not a neurologist, but I looked at the nervous system going down the vertebrae, the parasympathetic nervous system and other nervous system that controls sexual organs and controls all sorts of other things. And I realized that taking their thumb and finger and going down the vertebrae was not a bone thing. It was almost certainly a neurological thing. And therefore, I think that the examination is primarily neurologically based, not muscles, not bones, not heart. Bud Hopkins was the first to realize that they never, ever examined somebody's heart. And so not interested in any of that stuff. It's the neurology that's the most important thing. And it doesn't matter who's saying it around the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now, is this always, how do you say, these tests that are being run, the intention seems to be, again, towards this notion of creating hybrids or something in the sense of there's a sexual orientation to these abductions. And yeah. So is it for the purpose that you speculate of creating hybrids, or is this what the testimony is about?
It is for two purposes. It is for, number one, the creation of hybrids, which is the most important thing, and it was number two, to make sure that people are under control so that they can help hybrids. Those are the two main things that this phenomenon is about. Abductees give birth to hybrids and help hybrids. Then there's a variety of different types of hybrids who have different tasks, depending on how alien they look and how human they look. They have different tasks. Now, there's still a lot to learn, obviously. I've only been studying the subject for 40 years, for abductions for 40 years, and I've only been doing, since 81, so it's not quite 40 years, but I started doing abduction research in terms of hypnosis in 86. And that's after 86. That's all I studied. That's all I concentrated on. Before that, I did the UFO research and all that. But from 86 to almost 30 years later, you can actually learn. If you do enough sessions long enough with enough people, you can actually learn what is going on as people begin to fill in the puzzle. If everybody were to say something different, if everybody were to have different aliens, different procedures, different this, different that, I wouldn't be talking with you right now. Obviously, that would be idiosyncratic. It would be dependent on a person's upbringing and their fantasy life and all the rest of that stuff.
Like a dream state, for example, right?
Or a dream state, whatever it is, it wouldn't be real.
Everyone has a different understanding. You'd probably ascribe it to a hallucination or a dreamscape of the individual psyche.
Absolutely. With the abduction phenomenon, it's either it's mentally derived, or it's physical. It's happening, or it's not. There's nothing in the middle. You can't be mistaken. In other words, with UFOs, you can be mistaken, and people are mistaken all the time. They think they see something in the sky, they're certain it's a UFO. Upon investigation, it turns out to be a plane. They did see something, and it did look odd to them, but they were mistaken. With abductions, it happens or it didn't. One of the two. It's either coming out of your brain, or it's coming at you physically. There's not, you can't be mistaken. So, and abductions happen over and over and over again from the time a person is a child, and maybe even an infant, because parents are abducted with their babies. But certainly from early childhood on all the way into old age. We think it stops somewhere in maybe the age 70, in the mid 70s, maybe 80s. People on board UFOs do not report seeing really older abductees with them there, because usually, oftentimes there's crowds of people who are waiting to be processed, so to speak, and other people can identify them as men, women, children, older, younger, that sort of stuff. Although sometimes people will see their neighbors and or family members. Or one person mentioned that the person who was sitting across from him in a circular room worked behind the counter at a 7-Eleven in his area, of all things.
The whole neighborhood's getting picked up for abduction. But the question then being, okay, so if the agenda seems to be some kind of hybridization program, have we seen anything have anyone given testimony of seeing hybrids in the physical realm thereafter?
By physical realm, I think you mean...
By physical, I mean our 3D realm, that someone looks and says, this person looks like a hybrid, or looks like the hybrid that I saw in the UFO.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Now, this is a long, drawn-out program, and time is on these beings' side. And so, as I pointed out, that this is going back at least to the 20th century, most of it anyway. And for the first time, I began to hear stories in year 2003 about people who are hybrids who are living here, who I call hybrids. They do not look like hybrids. They look like humans. They have been bred to look average. They're going to be average size, average weight. They're not going to have anything distinctive about their faces. They're not going to talk any unusual way. They're just going to be average. The ones who aren't average are culled. They're culled out. They don't make it down to the ground. And people began to describe helping them get along here on Earth. Now, being born and raised on a UFO is wrong. You're not born. What happens is a fetus is inserted into a woman early on. It's probably just a gamete or a zygote or whatever, and then removed at around 9 to 11 weeks or so before they begin to show. They'll miss a period or two, and they think, gosh, well, what's happening to me? But then everything is fine. Then those fetuses are put in jars, in large glass containers filled with liquid nutrients, which they float around in, basically. And eventually they're removed. That means that they don't have a birth date. In other words, they don't know how old they are. They don't have birthday parties. They don't know their parents or their siblings, or anything to do with living in a house, or anything to do with driving in a car, or anything to do with watching television, or anything to do with anything human, basically. So when they come down, abductees have been teaching them on board a UFO for years. They've been teaching them what a dog is and why people have dogs, for example, and what a goat is. These are, I'm using actual examples that I did not put in this book, but I put in a previous book, The Threat, you know, what you use a goat for and things like that. But when they come down, finally, when they're in their, let's just say, late teens, young adult age, when they begin to show up, they don't know anything. No matter how much has been taught to them, there are millions of things, literally, that babies and small children and kids absorb just through observation by living here as humans that they don't know. For example, they have to, when they're young and being taught on board by abductees, they ask questions like, why do you use a plate? What's a plate for? Why do you put food on a plate? This is a question that no human being would ever ask, at least none in Western society. And when they come down after being taught for years and years, and now they're 17 or 18 or 20 years old, they are babes in the woods. They have to be taught how to shop, how to go to a supermarket. They have to be taught what an egg is. They have to be taught what you say when you go up to the cash register, and they're always with an abductee when this happens, and the cash register and the person behind the register says, "Hey, how you doing?" or "How are you?" or something like that. They can't just stand there. They have to reply, "Oh, I'm doing okay, fine, whatever." They have to say something in return that has to be taught to them.
Right.
So it goes on like this in the most astonishing way that it's almost impossible to imagine the level of teaching that goes on and the simplicity of it. I have a lot of transcripts in this book to drive that notion home from a bunch of different people who are doing this.
But you were never, did you ever try to seek out to meet one of these hybrids, these human hybrids, human alien hybrids?
I knew the address of one where one was living. It was 125 miles away from me, and I drove up, and I knew which apartment it was, but I didn't want to be hanging around this little parking lot in front of this small apartment house to attract attention. So I parked up the block and across the street, and I waited for 5 hours to see if anybody came in or went out of that place. And while I was waiting, this was all residential. There were no stores or anything around it. It was just strictly residential area. A school bus drove up behind me and let out a bunch of kids. And I thought to myself, you know, I've been sitting in front of somebody's house for 5 hours with cameras, with binoculars, seeing if anybody's going to walk in and out of this stairway leading to this apartment down the block. And I knew that I was going to be arrested. Little kids getting off. There's an old man waiting for him. So I pulled up stakes after this 5 hours. Nothing happened, and I went back home. But that's the only time I actually tried to do it. I then examined another area where where people were looking. But the only thing that you have to use subterfuge. I won't go into it, but I didn't see anything or anybody who looked suspicious. But then again, I wouldn't, because they look average. So if people out there say they've seen a hybrid because he was weird and he acted weird and he did this and it was that, did that, the answer is that's probably not true. It's probably just a weird person, not a hybrid or a hybrid, as I call them.
Right, but I would still be curious, at least, if you've talked to these abductees who say they've encountered these beings or been with these beings, that I would have wanted to tag along at least and met them, and just got your own instinctive take on how alien this being is.
That simply wouldn't happen. That is not possible. They would not abduct somebody with me standing there, and if they did,
no,
I would be
abduct. I'm saying, but you said abductees thereafter were engaging with hybrids and basically the human hybrids here, correct?
Yes, but it wouldn't happen. That it simply would not happen if I were to be with somebody who is an abductee, and if they needed to abduct that person, I would be switched off. That is to say, I would be laying on a bed asleep or something like that. I would never remember anything. I would not know anything had gone on. All I would know is that it was later than I thought it was, and I got to get out of here now, or something like that. But this simply wouldn't happen. This is a clandestine program. They don't show up like that. Here's the problem that we're dealing with. This is human memory. The evidence is human memory derived through hypnosis administered by amateurs, and everybody is an amateur in this business, including me. So it's a weak form of evidence, but it is evidence, and we have tremendous amounts of it now. It's just astonishing how much we know about this subject now. And people are physically missing from their normal environments when they are abducted. Police have been called, search parties have been sent out, and when people return, they have these scars on their body. Sometimes their clothes are on backwards, an article of clothing on backwards or something like that. Sometimes they come back wearing somebody else's clothes.
Well, there's also this issue of historical texts. Obviously, as an historian, you would be aware of the nature of historical references to skywalkers and to the gods, whether it's Babylon, Egypt, or Rome and Greece, and this issue about even Jesus Christ, the mother being basically inseminated by God or an angel. Doesn't that resonate as an abduction story, and this issue about human hybrids going back to the old times? Do you look at these stories from that perspective?
No, it does not resonate with me at all. This had a beginning. It's in a middle stage probably, and it's going to have an end stage. It does not go back, as far as I can tell, back to ancient times. Now, having said that, you have to understand that the question is this: we are life in outer space. You can make an argument that we are the only life in the universe. You can make it's a dumbass argument, but it's an actual argument that has been made. The tilts of the earth, the destruction of the dinosaurs, the growth of the primates, the seasons, blah, blah, blah. You can make that argument. But if the abduction phenomenon and the UFO phenomenon, which of course are one and the same, are real, then you cannot make an argument for two, just us and the aliens. Once you make the argument for two, you're talking about 2 trillion. You can't make that becomes a laugher if you start making an argument that there's only 2.
Right.
So the question is, how many of them are there out there? Are there more than 2? Well, yes. Are there 3? Probably. Are there 3 million? That makes sense. Okay. Are there 3 billion? Possible. So there might be other beings who at one time in UFOs, if I have no idea, surveyed the place, stopped here and there, did whatever they did back in ancient times, but we have no record of it in the 18th century. You know what I mean? There's nothing in the 18th century. It's only until you get to the last quarter of the 19th century with the onset of the mystery airship wave in 1896 and 1897 that you begin to see it. And then there's small airship waves of sightings in 1909, 1910, around then, and then it just sort of jumps to 1940s with the Foo Fighters in World War II, and then the Ghost Rockets in 1946 in Europe, and then 1947 the Kenneth Arnold sighting of the UFO, which eventually coined or newspapers coined the phrase flying saucers, because he said they skipped along the air like saucers. So there might be other beings who visited here, but they're non-abducting aliens. The group that we're dealing with abduct people. They're here for a reason. They're specifically here for a purpose. It's not just that they're visiting.
Do you have a hypothesis as to what that purpose is of this current threat, as you call it?
We do not know the reason why. We do not know the reason why. Now, if this were psychological, we'd know the reason why. People are making everything up. They'd make up the reason why too. That would be the first thing they said. They're here because now you just fill in the blank. We're destroying the planet. There used to be a group of people called contactees in the 1950s who tried to make a buck off the flying saucer phenomenon. And they got into flying saucers, and they went to the moon. One guy got out on the moon's surface. The air on the moon was just like the air you and I breathe here. Other ones went to Venus and Mars and Mercury and whatever. And this kind of stuff. And it was wonderful, and they had a great time. And they were left with a, quote, message. And the message was to stop atomic bombs because you'll destroy the planet, and kill communists while you're at it. You want to kill the communists and then stop the atomic bombs. That sort of whatever was au courant in the 1950s. That's what the messages were about. Now people say, well, they get a message every once in a while. In my opinion, in the abduction phenomenon, there's no such thing as a message. That's a non-starter. Once you learn about this phenomenon and you go into details about it and into depth about it, you realize that it's a non-starter. There's no such thing as a message, in my opinion. Now, it's always possible that there are other aliens who do find some guy or some woman somewhere and give them a message. That's always possible. I'm not saying it's not true, but in the phenomenon that I'm looking at, that doesn't happen. And the messages now are all about what's current now.
Okay, so when you have the testimony from the witnesses that you've interviewed and whatnot, there's no sort of thread as far as the message that's being given to them during the abduction?
There's no such thing as a message. Usually there's no talk at all.
I mean, sometimes people say that communication is telepathic, for example.
All communication is telepathic, and the communication is get up on the table. Or and if it's longer communication, as I said in the book beforehand, the threat, people will be taken into a room, for example, and shown a group, an image on a wall, and telepathically. The image is, this is an actual event. It's a picnic. There's people playing ball. There's people on a grill. They're standing around. They're wearing shorts, whatever it is. It's a regular picnic at a park, and they hear in their mind's ear, so to speak, can you tell the difference between you and us? And the abductee looks at the image on the wall and can't quite understand the question. What do you mean the difference? Everybody looks the same. What are you talking about? Now it's all done telepathically. And then they say, see, soon we will all be together. Soon there's going to be a change. Soon everybody will be happy. And soon everyone will know his place. And I heard that a number of times, and in the threat I talked about, what the change might be, and what did they mean by soon? Did it mean 1,000,000 years? Did it mean 5,000 years? Did it mean tomorrow? Nobody knew. Once again, if this were psychological, they'd know. They'd just tell me something. But starting in 2003, when I began to hear about these aliens who were living here, moving in, eating in restaurants, things like that, with abductees.
Are you saying the aliens being hybrids?
Hybrids, I'm sorry.
They don't look like a gray alien. It looks...
Right, no, they're all of them are aliens. The ones in charge are not the gray aliens. The ones in charge are the insect-like ones who people say look like a praying mantis. Those are the ones who are the ones who are order givers. Everybody else is an order taker, essentially. But the fact is, though, that the book, Walking Among Us Now, talks about the processes and the bureaucracy involved with settling hybrids into apartments, teaching them how to furnish an apartment, teaching them how to drive, teaching them this, teaching them that, so that they can just eventually get away from that abductee and live on their own. And then there'll be other ones that the abductees will help against the abductee's will. There's the one difference between hybrids or hybrids and humans is that they can control us neurologically and we cannot control them. That makes us a second-class species and them a first-class species. That makes us a terminal species, so to speak, in my opinion. because that neurological control to make you think or do or forget anything, that's a big one. It's not like they got an extra arm or something. They can handle 3 things at once. It's not like that. This is a major existential threat, I think, to humanity. If I may speak in grandiose terms, knowing full well that historians don't know what's going to happen in the future, and I certainly don't. But if I can generalize from what they've said and from what they do, this does not look good. It is exactly the opposite of what I thought when I first began to look into UFOs. I was thrilled to death. I thought this was contact, between 2 species, and there would be an exchange of ideas and information. It would be wonderful. We'd no longer be alone, all that kind of stuff. This turned out, as I did more and more research, I wrote Secret Life, then The Threat, then this Walking Among Us. There was a book in there that I edited also. But the trajectory of it was not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted to hear. It was different than what I thought it was. And as it went along and I began to realize, this is scary stuff. And eventually I became frightened of it. And now I'm almost sorry that I went into this and found this stuff. But in spite of how weak the evidence might be, I can go into more evidentiary matters to show you how strong it actually is. But I'm pleased that I could at least be a forerunner and tell people something here is happening that you have to pay attention to.
Right. But as far as the actual mission of the hybrids, there is no sense from the abductees of understanding what the hybrids are meant to do once they've adapted to human life and society.
They have been asked. Their answer is, my task is to live here. That's all they know. That's what they know. Their task is to live here. They were made for this task, and they fully understand that's what they're doing. The ones who know are the I call them insectolins, the insect-looking aliens. They're the ones who are in charge. They're the ones who came here first, in my opinion. They're the ones who got the ball rolling. They're the ones who eventually created gray aliens and with DNA from humans. And they don't say why they're doing this. They don't say, and they don't tell it to abductees when they communicate with abductees, and they don't tell it to anybody else. So we don't know. We just plain don't know. Now, I've looked at over 1,150 different abduction events. Once again, if this were psychological, you'd think I'd know by this time, and it just is not there. It's the one great remaining question: why? We know what they're doing, and we know the consequences of what they're doing, but we don't know why. In the book, I give some sort of ideas. What it could be, this, it could be another one, it could be something else, but I really don't know. And I plainly state I really don't know it. It's probably going to be something else entirely different than the 3 concepts that I give for why they're doing this.
And so these beings, the insectoids, let's say the gray aliens, would you say that they're entirely physical, 3-dimensional, or would we, in terms of placing them, could we put them into almost a different dimension of existence, almost beyond the 4th dimension?
They are living, sentient beings in our dimension. Now, the question ultimately you're asking in some way is what scientists stumble on. And the question is, how can they possibly get here? Traveling at the speed of light, which is as fast as anything can travel, from our closest star, it will take 10 trillion years, or whatever they say, 4 million years, 1 million years to get here, whatever it is, they can't get here from there. And the answer to that is, that's just about the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life, because it doesn't matter how they got here. Did they get here by going through different dimensions? Maybe. Did they go here by the universe,
and wormholes.
Yeah, the wormhole? Maybe. I don't care. The only question is, are they here or not? How they got here is of no concern.
Well, I asked the question not so much about how they got here, but also even to understand how they can, in a sense, distend space-time, or put so that people can't, how do you say, physically account for this absence from their physical world for that period of time, or how can they abduct in a place, how do you say, where even let's say even the motion of their craft itself, why would it not be more easily visible, right? At moments it seems like people have identified craft, they see them almost appear and disappear as though they are moving in and out of our physical dimension.
The answer is nobody knows, and I don't particularly care. All I know is that they have extremely advanced technology and they get it done. They do it. They take people, early on in the late 80s, this woman I was working with was saying that she was in her room, and then she suddenly she was sort of paralyzed. She couldn't move, and then she was sort of lifted up, and there were these beings around her, and she went towards the window, and she went out the window, and there was this craft up there. I said, "Oh, wait a minute. When you got to the window, did you open the window? Open." She said, no, I didn't open the window. I said, well, did the aliens open the window? No. I said, well, did the window open by itself? She said, no. She said, I think I'm going right through the closed window. Then she says, has anybody else ever said that? And the answer to that ultimately is yes, everybody. But she could have easily have said, yeah, of course I opened the window, and it would make her story more believable.
Right.
To keep it closed makes it less believable, and if you were inventing something in your unconscious, you'd open the window.
Right.
But people go through walls, they go through ceilings, and they do it in the middle of the day, and nobody sees them, and there's the concept of invisibility, and there's UFOs all over the place all the time that people do not see, this is advanced technology. You have to remember that our technology, the way we look at things now, it's only several hundred years old.
Correct.
Okay, it's 1,000 years. Let's call it 1,000 years old. That is not even the that does not rise to a nanosecond of the beginning of a blink of an eye. If somebody else has technology out there, it is automatically going to be extremely advanced, or they would have no technology at all.
Or they just have a different understanding of how the universe works that we're only beginning to start to understand when we talk about quantum physics and the nature of the energetic beings, energetic spectrums and whatnot. So
absolutely, all that goes together. It all goes together. Now, there's a flaw in that argument I just gave you. And the flaw is there might be so many technological civilizations out there that by the law of averages, some might be right where we are. That's the flaw.
Right. But then they probably wouldn't be here.
No, they wouldn't be here. They'd be wondering the same things perhaps as we are. Like, well, what's going on with these people who are saying that they're being abducted or whatever.
So in the final analysis, the abductions are real, and the threat is even more real.
That is correct. Sorry about that.
So that's the summation. Then you think you're issuing a warning. You're saying what these beings are doing in their abductions can pose a threat to mankind in our genetic future.
This is an existential threat. It threatens our very existence. That is exactly right. See, I'm some guy who taught history at Temple University for 37 years. I taught the University of Nebraska beforehand, and for a year. And I taught the first semester at the University of Wisconsin also. But I'm just some guy. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an astronomer. I'm not into astrophysics. Now, the problem here is that the scientific community has no concern with this subject whatsoever. There are some scientists involved with it, but the number one reason is the phenomenon of abductions or UFOs does not fit into any any form of study, any scholarly niche, so to speak. It's not a matter of astronomy. It's not a matter of astrophysics, really. That's all about how they would get here. It's not a matter. There's people who are cosmologists and they're looking at other planets. Well, it's not a matter of that either. They come from some other planet or where I don't care where they come from. Doesn't matter where they come from. You know what I mean? So it doesn't fall within the purview of any particular scientific community, and to be along with that, it's completely insane. So most scientists, 99.99% of them, will have absolutely nothing to do with this whatsoever. The edited book that I put together, published by a University Press of Kansas, a university press, therefore a peer-reviewed book, dealt with UFOs and abductions, and the book's called UFOs and Abductions, Challenging the Borders of Knowledge. And it came out in the year 2000. It had 10 serious people writing articles about UFOs and abductions. Except for Jerry Clark and Bud Hopkins, everybody had a PhD or an MD. And we aimed it directly at the scientific and academic community. The amount of people who were who wrote to me about that book and who were really taken with it and wanted to learn more was approximately, and I have to get this right now, approximately 0.
Well, at least you are doing something and putting your work out there, and that's more than maybe most people can say. But there could be who knows? You never know who you're going to influence as a result. So even coming on this show, hopefully you've influenced and educated some people. So we appreciate you coming on and sharing your information with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Thank you again, Dr. Jacobs. Well, it's definitely food for thought for those skeptics out there. Certainly need to read Dr. Jacobs' work and his books that include testimony. Obviously, coming from an historical point of view, it makes you wonder if these abductions and genetic experimentation has been going on for at least the last 200 years. Perhaps it indicates a much older trend, going back to perhaps even humanity's origins. So never end your quest and your quest for knowledge and understanding of what we are doing here as a species on this planet. This is Sean Stone signing off.